Hello, troublemakers. Welcome to this week's episode of Resolve Labor Podcast. I am your host, Lynn Fields, and this week we will be highlighting Dorothy Lee Bolden. Dorothy Lee Bolden was born October 13th, 1924. Shout out to the Libras. Her dad was Raymond Bolden, and her mom was Georgia May Patterson. She was born in Atlanta, Georgia. She was born at home because her parents didn't trust hospitals. Her father made about $7 a week as a chauffeur. Her mom made about $3.50 a week as a domestic maid. So, troublemakers, this kind of blew me away. So I went down a rabbit hole and found that back then, a 5-pound bag of sugar was 25 cents. And half a slab of bacon was 35 cents. 5 pounds of, cornmeal was between 19 and 25 cents. And greens were about 10 cents a bunch. So, yes, this was very poor wages. However, if you knew how to stretch a meal, then this probably wasn't too bad. At the age of 3, Dorothy lost her vision after a fall down 3 stories of stairs. And this damaged the nerves in her eyes. So she was without sight up until around the ages, like between 7 and 9, she regained her sight. Now, one of the jobs that Dorothy's mom did, she was she was a domestic maid, but she also did like laundry for other families on the side. And Dorothy and her brother would, pick up the laundry from the neighbors or from the people that her mom worked for, and then they would also deliver them in a basket. So she had been working from a very young age. And at the age of 9, she took on work as a domestic helper. She was basically her mom's assistant. And her job was to wash the dirty diapers of her mom's employers for about $1.25 a week. So, yes, for those of you who can't wrap your minds around that, 100 years ago, there were cloth diapers. We don't have the disposable diapers for the babies like we do now. It was just basically a piece of cloth that we wrapped their little butts in, and we had to actually wash these diapers every week. So, yay for the environment. Dorothy went to school till about 11th grade, and then she dropped out. She had aspirations of making suits like one of her aunts, but her impaired vision, it just didn't work out too good. She tried to go to designing school, but, with her vision being what it was, she didn't do very well there. So, troublemakers, like I said, having this impaired vision, it made it pretty difficult for her to be a seamstress or to have a career as a seamstress. So, like I said, in the 11th grade and at the age of 16, Dorothy dropped out and became a full-time domestic worker. She would start her days at 8 a.m. Well, actually, she started them at 4 so that she could be out of the house by 6. And then she'd be at her employer's by 8. And then she'd work until early evening or just after dinner. She worked about 12 hours a day and made $3 a week. One day, Dorothy's employer told her to stay late to do dinner dishes. Well, Dorothy refused and told her, she told the lady, she was like, look, at the end of the day ends and I'm off the clock. So Dorothy left. And while she was walking home, 2 police officers approached her. They rolled up and they arrested her. So you guys are probably thinking what is the charge, And so they basically were talking back to a white woman. So while at the station, 2 psychiatrists were brought in to examine her. Both of the doctors came to the same conclusion, that Dorothy was crazy. Y'all got to remember, it is 1940 and Dorothy has just talked back to a white woman in America. Therefore, she is crazy. So at some point at the night, Dorothy's uncle showed up to the station and he just made the argument look, Dorothy is not crazy. She's just bold. Y'all, I don't know if this was the actual argument that was made, but it worked. And at any rate, a fine was paid and Dorothy was released to her uncle. So, of course, troublemakers, y'all know, word travels fast, and nobody wanted to hire a smart mouth ass maid. So, Dorothy took a job as a traveling maid. She worked for families in Detroit, Chicago, New York, and she recalls that, she was intentional about working for Jewish families. She said she preferred to work with Jewish families because they paid more, they treated her with more respect. She remembers, one of the Jewish ladies actually taught her how to curse, taught her some Jewish curse words. She said that when she worked in the Christian homes, they didn't pay as much. They actually went so far as to, like, not only did they treat her shitty, they were like teaching their kids to treat her shitty. And she said that sexual harassment was more prevalent in the Christian households. In 1941, at the age of 17, she married a man named Frank Smith. However, according to Dorothy, quote, "I was sorry I married him." So apparently the marriage was pretty miserable and they got a divorce. In 1944, Dorothy married a man named Abram Thompson Sr. Now, she had one child out of her first marriage, but this marriage with Abram, they ended up having 8 children, but only 5 of them actually survived. 3 died, as babies. So she had 5 children with him. So let's just get this out of the way now, troublemakers. She had Avon, Dorothy, Altamise, Abram, and Anthony. Frank Jr. was the one that she had with her first husband. All I could find, out about Dorothy, she took a little time off to care for her children, but she eventually had to return to the workforce. She got a job in larger houses because of her experience. These larger houses, they had a whole team of domestic workers. Like, they had multiple maids, they had some chauffeurs, they had, gardeners. So these rich families, because of her expertise, she was put over the domestics, and she was making pretty good money for that time. She was actually making up to $90 a week in these large households. So Dorothy says that she got a lot of fulfillment out of running these houses and making the households run smoothly. She really enjoyed it. However, it was exhausting and it wasn't really fulfilling. Even though she enjoyed it, it wasn't really fulfilling. And so, because remember, her day starts at 4 a.m. and then she gets home at about 6 or 7, and then she's got to take care of her own family as far as cooking and cleaning and, delegating. One day in 1955, Dorothy saw the news story of Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on the bus. Dorothy recalls literally yelling at the TV. She was like, "Girl, sit down, comply, comply, comply. All of us is tired." But she said, as the story unfolded, it motivated her to become more involved in civic engagement. So she volunteered with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Now, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which is SNCC for short, they were a channel of student committees, throughout the United States, and they made a commitment to the civil rights movement during the 1960s. They led a lot of sit-ins and voter registrations, and stuff like that. So that's where, like Martin Luther King, he worked, closely with SNCC, and through her involvement with SNCC, our girl Dorothy, she actually became close with John Lewis. She volunteered with SNCC, and she worked on school desegregation, voter registration, and housing. She says her husband's support on the home front made her activism possible. But Dorothy also recognized that civic engagement was something that a lot of domestic workers couldn't really be a part of. Troublemakers, we know that activism, it costs time. It costs a lot of time. And, time was, like most domestic workers at this time, that was something that a lot of them couldn't afford. So it would have been hard for these women to care about politics and the things that were going on, in the world while they worked these thankless jobs for so little money. Like, they needed their money.
Hey, this is Dave Alpa from Labor Know Your Rights. I'm proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network with more than 200 labor radio shows and podcasts from across the country and around the world. the Labor Radio Podcast Network, where working people speak. Find us at laborradionetwork, all one word, .org. Thanks.
And Dorothy, she respected this argument a lot. And working with, leaders like John Lewis and Martin Luther King Jr. with SNCC, Dorothy became motivated to organize the domestic workers. Remember, MLK was her neighbor. And in the civil rights movement was just as much about labor rights as civil rights, because we all know that they are enshrined together. So Dorothy approaches MLK and she asked him, to help her organize the maids. She said that this would be really important. There's a lot of them in the city, and that, they could be really important to a lot of the causes, that he was fighting for. And Dorothy recalls that, she made this really passionate argument about him organizing these domestic workers. And he looked at her, he put his hand on her shoulder, he looked her right in the face, and he said, well, that sounds like a good job for you to do. So what Dorothy did was she started, catching all the different bus lines throughout the city, because she knew that this is where the maids would be. And instead of trying to have a big meeting and have them take off time to come to her, she went to them, because she was like, this is the way that we can have meetings. We can have these little de facto meetings on the bus, out of the ear sight of our employers. And then the workers, they would, feel free to speak up about grievances and working conditions and pay without, being worried about retribution. Dorothy remembers that she spoke to hundreds of maids. And in the summer of 1968, 70 domestic workers gathered in Atlanta to form the National Domestic Workers Union of America. The union quickly enrolled thousands of domestic workers. Through the 1960s, the national minimum wage was $1.25 an hour. But black maids at this time, they made between $3.50 and $5 a day for 12 to 14-hour shifts. So they were getting stiffed like big time. The union dues was $1 a month. Dorothy taught the domestics, how to negotiate their own contracts. She was big on communication. She taught them, their rights on the job. She trained them in cooking, shopping, childcare, and first aid. Now, troublemakers, most of these domestics, of course, yes, they did already know how to do this. But the union believed that by having the members receive formal training, they would be declared as professionals and worthy of respect. Graduates of the program even got certificates. They could show they got these certificates that they could show their employers. Like, look, y'all, I got my papers. Every member was also required to be a registered voter and to vote. Like, Dorothy's thing was, it is not just enough to be registered. You have to actually fucking vote. And I really wish that a lot of unions would do this, because this is such a brilliant idea. So I don't know. Over time, a change was noticed, in the domestic workforce. They dressed sharper, they carried themselves with more confidence. And not only did they they carried themselves with more confidence, like other chapters started popping up in other cities around Georgia. And within 2 years, the maids, they went from on average $3.50 to $5 a day to $13.50 to $15 a day. The union also made sure, the domestic workers that, that they qualified for Social Security and the workers and workers' comp. The union even helped, with job placement if negotiations between the maids and their employers, were unsuccessful. Now, troublemakers, y'all already know that with all this success, you're going to draw some attention. So all this good stuff that was happening for them came with a side of bad, because not only did the workers, recognize this movement, there were some who were not as impressed. So yeah, the KKK came a-calling, like Ku Klux Klan, like that KKK. I mean, literally calling her home. Dorothy says she'd get calls and the person on the other end was like, quote, "Those bitches ain't worth that much money. You're a damn fool." But Dorothy, she said she would just respond, yeah, but they ain't your fool. And then they would hang up. And then she said there was one time, somebody called and said, your little chubby ass needs to get spanked. And she said, well, come over here and grab it. So Dorothy, even though it kind of pissed her off, she said it actually like made her want to keep going, because if they were that pissed off, then obviously she was doing something right. But luckily, nothing egregious happened to her. Y'all know how it is. Like, we got thumb thugs today that be online talking their shit, ain't gonna do nothing. And the KKK was the same. They was just making all these phone calls and making all these little threats and wasn't gonna bust a grape. So we weren't even mad about it. So Dorothy said she just kept answering the phone because she had time, right? Our girl had time. She truly believed in what she was doing. She wanted the domestics to see themselves as true entrepreneurs. She said, their service was a business and they were to be respected and treated as such. She would tell them, if you run a business, can I tell you what price to put on your bread? I love that. I am going to use that for the rest of 2024. When anybody asks me for a hookup on anything. Like, I have no services to give anybody to give a hookup, but, in case I ever do, then I'm going to use that bread line. In 1970, the union announced its first annual Maids Honors Day. And they had a gala for the workers and their loved ones. They even announced a Maid of the Year. In 1972, Governor Jimmy Carter announced a statewide Maids' Honor Day. The maids became a powerful voting bloc, and soon any politician in Georgia who was running for anything had to go through Dorothy. John Lewis recalls, he says, she spoke up, she spoke out, and when she saw something that wasn't right or fair, she would say something. He added, you had to go through her, meaning as in running for office. He said, you had to go through her. It didn't matter if you were running for city office or just running outside. You had to get Dorothy's blessing. Dorothy consulted with, Presidents Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, and Jimmy Carter during their presidencies. President Nixon actually appointed her to an advisory committee on social issues. The union disbanded after Dorothy retired in 1994. Dorothy died July 14, 2005 from heart problems. She was 80 years old. Overall, the union ended up organizing in 10 cities with over 13,000 members. Now, troublemakers, this is the part of the show where we give our flowers, because we do not wait till people are no longer with us. We do not wait till they retire to tell them how much we appreciate them. And this week, I will be giving flowers to Dr. Stephanie Furtado. Dr. Stephanie Furtado is, a professor at University of Illinois Labor Education Program. She provides workshops and extensive programming for unions and the general public in the Champaign-Urbana campus and throughout Illinois. She's also co-director of the Regina V. Polk School. So once again, if you guys just apply to Polk, you'll get to hang out with Stephanie's cool ass. Stephanie is, one of those people who, speaks truth to power. I learn something new every time I talk to this person. She is the one that inspired me to even want to discuss labor history. She made it look cool. She made it sound cool. And, I will forever be grateful to her for that. She wrote a book called Race, Recreation, and Rebellion, which looks at the struggles over public space during the civil rights movement in Cleveland, Ohio. She is the past president, treasurer, bargaining team, and strike committee member of the Graduate Employees Union or Organization Local 6300 of the Illinois Federation of Teachers, and she's a former delegate to the Champaign County Labor Council. She is currently a steward and organizing chair of the Non-Tenure Faculty Coalition, IFT Local 6546. I love Stephanie. Everybody who knows her loves her. They respect her. And, she's like one of the like major forces of the labor education movement. If you ever get an opportunity to sit at her feet and learn anything, just pay attention. Like, it's not going to be hard because she does these awesome characters, because apparently she's a theater junkie and a theater kid, nerdy person at heart. So we absolutely, appreciate that for her. It always adds that little bit of like zeal to all of her lectures and speeches. So Stephanie, these are your flowers, girl. We appreciate you, and keep rising. Looking forward to continuing to work with you in the future. So that's our show this week, Troublemakers. Keep following us, sharing us, reviewing us. And if you would like to honor a union member in your local or in your community, please write to us. Write to us at resolvedlaborpod@gmail.com. That is resolvedlaborpod@gmail.com. And we will be honored to read one of your letters on the air on a future episode. Thanks again for listening. As always, peace and solidarity. This week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast is produced by The Create Place Studio. You can find them on all social media platforms at The Create Place STL. We Won is performed by Joe Jinks and written by John O'Connor. This has been Resolved Labor Podcast. As always, peace and solidarity.
Everybody come and join in the union. Begin. Stand together to overcome soon and